Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Shroudex. Somewhere online right now, people are arguing about a book that doesn't exist. Not a rumor, not a hoax. Every person discussing it remembers reading it, watching it, or hearing it in exactly the same detail, down to specific passages nobody can actually trace back to a printed page. When the Foundation finally traces it back to a real, living name, that person swears under real pressure that they never wrote it at all. This is SCP-2747. It has no body, no cell, nothing you could ever lock a door on. What it has instead is a pattern, and the file's own closing warning is that the very story you're listening to right now might already contain it. This channel has covered suns, ancient gods, salesmen, quarantines, and a teddy bear that builds monsters out of affection. This file is a different category of frightening entirely because it isn't asking you to fear something inside the story. It's asking you to consider whether the story itself, the one you're listening to right now, is safe to be inside of at all. Item number 2, 747, written by an author, credited as Min Min. Every other entry this channel has covered has something physical anchoring its containment procedures. A cell, a perimeter, a locked door, however inadequate that door eventually turns out to be. This file's procedures are built entirely differently. Nothing to hold, nothing to lock, only something to watch for, a threat that never manifests as a body or an object anywhere in its documented history, because it was never that kind of threat to begin with. Compare that to the locked box test our very first episode explained in detail. Put the anomaly in a sealed box. If nothing happens, safe. If you don't know, what will happen, Euclid? If it escapes easily, Keter. This file doesn't just break that test, it makes the box itself irrelevant, because there's no physical anomaly anywhere in this case to place inside one in the first place. That absence of a physical target is exactly what earns this file its threat-level black marking. A wall can fail, a perimeter can be breached. Both of those failures, however catastrophic, still happen somewhere specific to something specific that the Foundation can point to afterward and study. This threat doesn't offer that kind of failure. When it succeeds, there's nothing left over to examine, only the absence of something that, by every outside account, should still be there. Its object class is listed as both Euclid and Keter simultaneously, not one replacing the other the way our orientation episode explained classification usually work, but both, stacked directly on top of each other. Its threat level carries a marking most entries in this archive never receive at all. Black. The file itself explains why later, once you understand what this entry is actually capable of. For now, sit with the classification alone, because a double designation this severe on a threat with no physical form whatsoever should already tell you this file is going to break several of the patterns this channel's earlier episodes have taught you to expect. Automated watchdog algorithms scan online and print media constantly, searching for a specific list of key phrases and narrative signatures. Any match gets flagged immediately and routed straight to a department that exists specifically to study cases exactly like this one. Once confirmed, the affected material isn't destroyed outright. It's quietly corrected instead, through standard Foundation media alteration protocol, the same kind of surgical, undetectable edit our orientation episode described when explaining how amnestics protect the veil at a larger scale. Here, it isn't a memory being rewritten. It's a piece of media itself, adjusted precisely enough that nothing about the correction looks unusual to anyone encountering it afterward. It's worth naming how strange this containment approach is compared to almost every other file this channel has covered. This isn't a perimeter around a place or a set of rules governing a creature's behavior. It's a permanent, invisible layer of editorial control quietly running underneath a meaningful share of the internet's creative output, correcting pieces of media the vast majority of readers will never know were ever touched at all. Watching passively was never going to be enough on its own. And at some point, the Foundation made a decision this channel's orientation episode would recognize immediately as characteristic. Rather than only waiting for this phenomenon to happen naturally, they decided to try provoking it deliberately. The plan is called Observational Procedure Lucid Chalice. Computers generate fictional narratives automatically at increasing levels of structural complexity, while separate software scans the results for the same telltale irregularities documented in every confirmed case, slowly mapping exactly what conditions seem to invite this phenomenon to occur. A separate, quieter watch list tracks 7,000 real living artists, chosen specifically because their existing work leans towards stories nested inside other stories, on the chance that the pattern might emerge from their work naturally rather than needing to be generated at all. Where the Foundation judges it necessary, some of those artists are quietly funded or subtly influenced to keep producing exactly that kind of narrative, without ever being told why an anonymous grant or opportunity keeps steering their work in that particular direction. There's something worth sitting with in that decision to actively provoke a threat-level black phenomenon on purpose, rather than simply continuing to monitor for it passively. This channel's orientation episode described the Foundation as an organization built around caution, containment, and controlled risk. Here, faced with something it barely understands and cannot physically restrain under any circumstances, it chooses to lean forward into the danger instead, on the theory that understanding the trigger conditions is worth the risk of triggering the exact catastrophe the file's own closing rule was written specifically to prevent. It's also worth naming what that quiet influence over 7,000 real artists actually amounts to, stripped of its clinical framing. An organization is deliberately shaping the creative output of thousands of living people without their knowledge or consent, specifically to study a phenomenon capable of erasing the exact stories those artists are being nudged to produce. Every other file this channel has covered treats human collateral as an unfortunate cost of containment. This one treats it as a research methodology. On forums, wikis, and review sites, a work of fiction that was never actually produced begins to be discussed as though it had always existed. Screenshots, photographs of physical copies, direct quoted excerpts cited with confident specificity, all of it consistent, all of it detailed, none of it traceable to anything real once the Foundation actually goes looking. In several documented cases, entire passages have been reconstructed purely from how strangers online independently describe them, comparing notes across unrelated posts until a coherent excerpt emerges that nobody involved ever actually wrote down first. There's a specific kind of vertigo built into that reconstruction process, worth naming directly. Ordinarily, a false memory or a fabricated rumor can be traced back to a single origin point, one person who started it, one post that got it wrong. These reconstructions have no such origin. Multiple strangers, with no connection to each other, independently describe the same specific passage in matching enough detail that Foundation researchers can piece together something resembling a complete excerpt from a work that, by every other measure available, never existed at all. It's worth noting, too, how ordinary the platforms hosting these false memories actually are. Not a hidden network, not an occult message board built for exactly this purpose. Ordinary forums, ordinary review sites, ordinary corners of the internet indistinguishable from the ones any viewer of this video has scrolled through themselves at some point, discussing something that, by every available account, was never real to begin with. Sometimes the affected material traces back to a real living person credited as its creator. Questioned directly by Foundation personnel, every single one of them denies it, not evasively, not defensively, but completely, insisting the work never existed at all, with the same flat certainty you'd expect from someone asked to confirm their own name. In every single documented case, the discovery happens after the fact. Nobody has ever watched this phenomenon happen in real time, and no instance on record has ever been dated earlier than January of 2008. Nobody in the file claims to know why that specific boundary exists, or what, if anything, changed around that date to make this phenomenon possible at all. It's worth considering what that certainty actually implies. rather than simply noting how strange it is. Most people, confronted with detailed evidence attributed to them personally, at least pause to consider the possibility of memory loss, intoxication, or some gap in their own recollection. These subjects never do. Their denial reads less like someone trying to remember something forgotten and more like someone being asked to confirm they've committed a crime that, from their perspective, has simply never occurred, because in the timeline they're currently living inside, it hasn't. The Department of Analytics eventually settled on a working theory, later confirmed outright rather than left as speculation: a naturally occurring Anafabula, an anti-narrative, a cluster of interlocking signs, symbols, and narrative fragments that, once combined past a certain threshold inside a piece of fiction, causes that fiction to unmake itself from within. It works through layers: a story within a story, a film about a filmmaker, a book about a book. If the Anafabula appears in the innermost layer of a nested structure like that, that inner layer ceases to exist first, collapsing from within its own fiction. Then the layer containing it disappears too. Then the layer containing that one, each level erasing the level it was resting on, moving steadily outward. And in every single documented case, regardless of medium or genre, the Anafabula plays the exact same structural role. Not a monster hiding inside the story's own antagonist, built into its fictional logic from the moment enough of the pattern's elements are present together. It's worth pausing on how unusual it is for this archive to move a theory from hypothesis to confirmed fact within a single file, rather than leaving it permanently open the way our earlier episodes have shown you most unresolved cases stay. That confirmation matters here specifically because of what it rules out. This isn't the Foundation's best guess at an explanation. It's a mechanism the file treats as understood well enough to build an entire deliberate research program around lucid chalice, on the assumption that the theory is correct. The name itself is worth sitting with for a moment too. An Anafabula, an anti-story, built from the same instinct that gives every other anomaly in this archive its classification. Naming something doesn't explain it. It just gives researchers a word stable enough to build a containment strategy around, even when the thing the word describes remains, at its core, almost entirely mysterious. The Foundation has documented 7 confirmed cases, each in a completely different medium, and reading them together is more unsettling than any single one on its own. The first appeared as a short story credited to a real celebrated author. Its existence spread across 17 separate encyclopedia articles nobody could trace to an original publication. A man sails down a river toward a mountain described only as black and horned. He never reaches it, dying of exhaustion before the journey ends, no closer to the mountain than when he began. The second surfaced as an animated film, credited to a celebrated reel director, documented only through 55 separate trope page edits across a collaborative reference site. Its plot follows a manga artist hallucinating under deadline pressure, culminating in a scene where the shadows inside her own apartment reach out and physically consume her. The third took the shape of a video game, discussed in exhaustive technical detail across 77 forum threads by established longtime community members. Reviewers describe a party of 6 searching a ruined kingdom for a companion known only as Sister, while every non-player character references a coal-black, thorn-bound book said to grant power or unleash a curse. Not one reviewer, across all 77 threads, ever actually found that book inside the game itself. The fourth wasn't a single work at all. It was an entire collaborative fiction wiki, reconstructed after the fact from 49 separate pieces of fan writing that referenced it. 7 recurring characters wander between realms, collecting strange supernatural items, one of which recurs constantly, a 7-sided obsidian emblem said to destroy anything it touches, object, person, or idea alike. A sinister, unnamed figure holds it throughout every account. No piece of writing referencing this wiki ever shows their face. The fifth took the form of a music review published across 14 reputable outlets, crediting a famous British rock band with a ninth studio album built from manipulated samples of their own earlier work. One especially detailed review describes lyrics circling endlessly around self-harm and isolation without ever quite landing on either. The band itself is described incorrectly as no longer active. In reality, they never stopped recording at all, a small factual crack running directly through the center of an otherwise perfectly consistent illusion. The sixth surfaced as an academic subject. 7 separate literary journals publishing on the same obscure manuscript within a single week of each other. Supposedly discovered in the home of a reclusive writer in South Africa, alongside a set of charcoal illustrations, the manuscript describes a mystic learning the secret structure of the Earth's interior from a dream entity that knows impossibly that it exists only as a dream. 6 realms are described before the account ends abruptly, just short of the 7th and final threshold. The 7th and final documented case was an interactive novel discussed across several fiction blogs and one passing mention in a national magazine. 7 narrative threads, each following a different character, eventually converge at a roadside diner during a storm. Characters repeatedly try to consult the testimony of someone referred to only as the stranger, who never actually appears. No murderer is ever revealed. No victim is ever confirmed. The story simply never actually ends. Notice, too, how carefully spread across unrelated creative communities these 7 cases are. A literary tradition, animation, gaming culture, collaborative fan fiction, the music industry, academic literary criticism, interactive digital storytelling. If this were a single author's obsession bleeding into public discourse, you'd expect some overlap, some shared audience, some traceable point of contact between cases. There is none documented anywhere in this file. 7 completely separate creative ecosystems, each independently producing the exact same underlying structure, with no evidence any of them ever influenced each other. 7 completely different genres. 7 completely different mediums, spanning literature, animation, gaming, collaborative fiction, music, academia, and interactive storytelling. One recurring shape sitting underneath all of them, once you know to look for it. A journey toward something unreachable, a consuming darkness, a hidden object of near total power, a silent, faceless antagonist, an entity somewhere in the narrative that is impossibly, uncomfortably aware of its own fictional nature. None of these 7 stories exist in any verifiable sense the Foundation has ever been able to confirm. And yet, by the file's own account, every single one of them was real enough, functionally, to erase whatever medium was originally supposed to be containing it. There's also something worth naming about that 5th element specifically, an entity within the narrative aware of its own fictional nature. 6 of the 7 recurring traits describe plot content, imagery, structure, things a story can contain without anything unusual happening to the reader. That 7th trait is different in kind. It requires the fiction to look outward, however briefly, toward the fact that it is fiction, which is precisely the kind of self-awareness this entire file has been quietly building toward the whole time you've been listening to it. The file promises a full, technical explanation of how Lucid Chalice's accumulated results actually work, in a section labeled Appendix B. Open it, and there's nothing there, not redacted in the sense this channel's orientation episode explained, with a black bar covering specific sensitive content, not classified, with a clearance level attached explaining who might eventually read it, simply marked, in 3 plain words, data lost. Every other appendix in this file remains fully intact. Only the one explaining how the Anafabula actually functions at a mechanical level is gone, and the file offers no explanation for why. That specific isolated gap is more unsettling than a redaction ever could be, because a redaction at least confirms the information used to exist. This one doesn't confirm anything at all. It's worth asking what kind of failure produces a gap phrased exactly that way. Redactions in this archive, as our earlier episodes explained, are deliberate, controlled, a choice made by someone with the authority to decide what stays hidden. Data lost implies something closer to an accident, information that existed at some point and no longer does, through a process nobody documented well enough to explain afterward. Combined with everything else in this file, that specific phrasing invites an uncomfortable question. What kind of accident erases only the one section explaining how a story-erasing phenomenon actually works, and leaves everything else around it completely untouched? Once the lucid chalice model was sufficiently confirmed, a single absolute rule was added directly to this file. The properties of the Anafabula must never be allowed to occur in real life, not by accident and not by design. Anything that comes close enough to matching that pattern in any object, person, or event is to be altered by whatever means necessary. No exceptions carved out for scale, intent, or circumstance. Access to this entire file is restricted to a narrow, specific clearance level most Foundation personnel will never hold in their entire careers. A level of secrecy this channel's orientation episode would recognize as reserved for the organization's most existential concerns. Sit with the phrase, "not by accident, not by design," for a moment, because it's doing more work than it first appears to. Most Foundation rules this channel has covered are written to prevent deliberate misuse. A weapon someone might choose to build, a boundary someone might choose to cross. Writing a rule that also has to account for pure accident means the Foundation itself believes this pattern could assemble unintentionally through nothing more than a series of creative choices nobody involved ever meant as a coordinated act. That's a much harder threat to guard against than a villain with a plan. There's no one to stop. There's only a shape to watch for, appearing anywhere, for no reason at all. Here's the detail that turns this file from disturbing into something closer to genuinely destabilizing. Every manifestation on record was fiction, discussing fiction again, layer nested inside layer. The SCP Foundation, as a shared creative universe, is exactly that same structure. A fictional story about fictional people writing fictional case files, about fictional anomalies, read by an audience sitting one further layer outside all of it. If the Anafabula's pattern can genuinely appear anywhere stories nest inside other stories, there's no framework anywhere in this file that rules out the exact layer you're sitting in right now, listening to a documentary about a document that describes exactly this problem. Run the checklist this file itself provides. The same 5 recurring elements identified across all 7 manifestations against the broader mythology this channel has spent multiple episodes explaining. A journey toward something unreachable, the O5 Council most staff never confirm is even real. A consuming darkness, entities like the Black Moon, this channel has already covered in detail. A hidden object of absolute power, a Thaumiel class asset known to almost no one. A silent, unseen antagonist standing above even the overseers themselves, the administrator, whose full nature this archive has never once fully confirmed. And running underneath every single one of those, an entire collaborative fiction project increasingly aware, across file after file, of its own fictional nature. This channel didn't set out to build that comparison deliberately. The file did it for us simply by existing. Most Foundation files this channel has covered describe a threat you could, in theory, run from, a location to avoid, a door not to open, a person not to trust. This one describes something that doesn't need to reach you directly at all. It only needs the story you happen to be inside of to reach the wrong shape, from the inside, without anyone involved necessarily noticing until the layer around them is already gone. 7 confirmed cases, 1 missing appendix, 1 absolute rule that exists purely to keep this pattern from ever happening for real, written by an organization that, by its own internal logic, has no way of confirming it isn't already living inside the exact structure it's trying to prevent. There's a broader thread worth pulling here, tying back to everything this channel has already shown you across every previous episode. Our very first orientation episode explained the Foundation as a bureaucracy built specifically to survive contact with the impossible. Every episode since has, in its own way, tested how far that survival actually extends against a sun, against an ancient god, against a salesman, against a bear that only ever wanted to make a friend. This file tests something none of the others dared to touch directly, not whether the Foundation can survive what it contains, whether the story describing the Foundation can survive being told at all. So that's SCP-2747. As below, so above. No cell. No monster you could ever point a weapon at. Just a pattern, quietly repeating itself across 7 unrelated mediums, and a warning, buried in its own classification, that the story containing that warning might already qualify. A river that never reaches its mountain. Shadows that finish what a deadline started. A book no reviewer ever actually found. An emblem that destroys anything it touches, held by a figure no account has ever shown clearly. An album that was never recorded, describing exactly the kind of isolation this file has spent its entire runtime building toward. A dream that stops, deliberately, one threshold short of finishing. A stranger who never arrives in a story that never ends. Most Foundation files this channel has covered ask you to fear something specific. This one asks you to consider the shape of the thing you're currently inside of, and to notice that nothing in this file has ever fully ruled it out. I'm Shroudex. See you in the dark. If you're still there, there's no tidy way to close an episode built entirely around a file that refuses to close itself. This channel could tell you the danger has passed, that the pattern has been fully mapped, that the rule holds and always will. The file itself never offers that reassurance, and repeating it here, without the file's own confidence behind it, would be exactly the kind of comfortable lie this particular entry has spent its entire runtime warning you not to trust.